Hi, I'm Chris Flores, and this is my lovely wife, Jaime.
And we're the Kidmin leaders here at Life Share Church.
And this is our Jesus story. So growing up with a single mom and a brother and sister, it was three of us. I was the oldest of the three. We didn't have a father, so it was me being the father at the time. And it was tough. It was tough growing up that way.
My earliest memories from my childhood were my parents having an abusive marriage. My mom was an alcoholic, and my dad was a drug addict, but he was a hardworking businessman. My parents divorced when I was little, and my dad raised my brother and I, and that just left me, I just always remember being a natural mother from a really young age.
So growing up, my mom raised us Jehovah's Witness, which is very difficult to understand and practice, especially at a young age. We went through many different challenges in that, and we were left hurt and isolated at one point. So at that point, we really didn't want anything to do with Jesus or God or religion.
I was exposed to the story of Jesus at a young age. My dad's life was a bit messy, and so we spent a lot of time with my grandparents as a child, and they were leaders in their local church, so they would have us at church as often as they possibly could. And so I was exposed to the story of Jesus and the salvation message really young, and I just remember being tender to the Lord and just praying and asking God to save me from a really young age and to make something of my life.
I was always told my father was dead, and I got to meet my father when I was a teen. So that was very memorable to know that my dad wanted me and that he had been looking for me. So it was memorable. He embraced me. It was full of love and joy. I was so happy at the time. And then a year later, my father passed away. So all the pain and darkness and everything that falls with death was right behind it. So obviously the first thing I did is blame God. I hated God at the time. I even felt sick just hearing his name.
When I was about 10, my dad went to prison, and he was facing life in prison. And it was during that absence, when he was gone, that I suffered various types of abuse. And when I was by about the time I was 12, I started dabbling in some of the things that my parents had, alcohol and drugs, things like that. But I never felt inclined to do those things. Around that time, my dad got out of prison and had told me that he was going to serve the Lord. He had become the prison chaplain at his small prison, and I, of course, didn't really believe him, but he somehow convinced me to come and live with him, and so we did.
After my dad died, it was all about me. I married young, had a daughter by the time I was 20, and I was caught up in drugs and bad influences, trouble with the law, and it was dark. I was in a dark place. But I always knew I was a good guy. I wanted to do better for my daughter. I wanted to give her a better life. And at that point, everything started to go down. My marriage fell apart, and I felt alone.
Through high school, my dad was a pastor of a small mission church in an apartment complex and a neighborhood clubhouse. And so through that time, I really got to serve and be used by God. And I was just really passionate for the Lord. But somewhere along the lines, I was also being drawn by bad influences. And I hardened my heart to God and chose to walk away from him. And my senior year of high school, I moved out of my dad's house and lived in my car. And it was during that time that I met Chris.
And she wasn't going to church at the time, and her life was kind of messy at the time, and I had just gone through all this that I went through. And she would try to tell me about Jesus and the Word and understand her beliefs, and I just made fun of her. I didn't want to hear nothing of it because I didn't believe in it.
My family was not happy with mine and Chris's relationship. They had natural objections, but it didn't stop me. Once I started loving them, I just knew that I wanted them to know Jesus and to be saved. And so about that time, my mother had gotten saved and was going to a church, and she would invite both Chris and I to come to church. And so we did. And I started just really coming back to the Lord.
You know, she would go to church without me, and I would stay home, and it was tough because I wasn't there with her. I wanted to stay home. And eventually I understood the need for Jesus. I wanted Jesus after that because she was consistently going with or without me. And as I realized that on my own, I eventually got saved and then got baptized a year later on Valentine's Day.
We were living together for 2 years at that point, and we were both feeling pretty convicted by it. And so we decided, it was a tough choice, but we decided to move apart and seek the Lord. What did he want for us? Were we going to get married and make a life together? And so it was 2 years later that we were engaged and married.
I'm thankful for God's mercy, even though I was so far away from him. I even hated him. But he continued to show me grace and love through that, and I didn't even know it.
Chris and I have experienced God's grace and mercy over and over the last years. All the years since, we've been growing up in Christ together.
As a Christ follower, I realized it wasn't about my performance for church or God. It was about what Christ did for me.
We've both always had a desire to care for others, and we know what it's like to be separated from God and our families. In the past 10 years, God's brought us into a relationship with Ted and Nana, and they just modeled for us that it's by God's grace alone and nothing that we can do to add to that. And so we're just so thankful that I always say my favorite verse is, while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. And so we're really grateful to be here today.